Hi, everyone. So this week we will be talking about cognitive behavioral family therapy, cognitive behavioral couple therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. So they're all rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. This like CBCT, which is couple, or CBFT, which is family. They're attempts at making cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very individualized, more systemically applicable. So I'll be sharing with you some of the ways in which some of the foundations of cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as some of the ways in which there is a systemic application. And then I'm also going to be exposing you to a couple different theories that have some foundations in cognitive behavioral therapy that are meant for systemic or relational work. All right, so some leading figures, Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, are both very well known in like the CBT world. So, like many of our field's founders, Albert Ellis was a psychiatrist, and Aaron Beck, or I'm sorry, Albert Ellis was a psychologist, and Aaron Beck a psychiatrist. So contextualizing information about each of these men. So Aaron Beck was born in Providence, Rhode Island, to Russian Jewish immigrants. He attended Yale Medical School. He graduated in 1946 with his MD, specializing in neurology, and then became interested in psychoanalysis. He then was part of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania in 1954, and he developed the Beck Depression Inventory, a very well-known depression inventory, the BDI. Albert Ellis, he developed rational emotive behavioral therapy, again, rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. He was raised in the Bronx of New York. His paternal grandparents were Jewish immigrants from the Russian Empire. His maternal grandmother was from Galicia. I hope I'm saying that right. Poland in Austria-Hungary. He entered the field of clinical psychology after first earning his bachelor's in business. He was originally trained as a psychoanalyst. Okay, so according to Ellis's 2014 ABC theory, and we'll get into this in much more detail, but I'll give you an overview here of dysfunctional behavior. It is not the activating event, the A, of people's lives that have disturbing consequences, the C, but the unrealistic interpretation. Again, this is the language of this theory. So, take it for what it's worth, that they give the events or the irrational beliefs. So, really, what we are struggling with is the B of the ABC, and about what has taken place that caused them the trouble. So, again, you can notice that word caused. There is linear causality in from a CBT traditional viewpoint. Okay, so Aaron Beck, he gave greater depth to, put more weight into family interactive patterns. He conducted research with depressed patients. He concluded they felt as they did because they committed characteristic errors of thinking. We'll talk about these, also known as cognitive distortions. So, negative thoughts about themselves, the world, the future. So, even though he was like watching families, he was still focused on the individual and their thought patterns, which is which is the foundation in many ways of CBT. So the foundational or fundamental premise of the theory is that cognitive behavioralists understand personal functioning to be the result of continuous reciprocal interaction between behavior and its controlling social conditions, so back and forth, emphasizing the importance of self-regulation and self-direction in altering behavior. So very accountability, responsibility focused. So cognitive behavioral therapy attempts to modify the thoughts and actions by influencing an individual's conscious patterns of thoughts. So this is important because CBT in many ways, so this kind of behavioral wave of the mental health field was in many ways a direct response to its psychoanalytic roots. So psychoanalysis is very much looks at or tries to explore to the best of its ability these unconscious or subconscious thoughts, beliefs, and behavioral. So ultimately it went like psychoanalysis, behavioral, then cognitive behavioral. So like behaviorists were like this, like psychoanalytic mushy gushy stuff, like what do you do with it? We're just sitting and free associating in a room for what change is there? So then the thought was we need something concrete, tangible. So behavioralism came essentially out of a response to psychoanalysis, and cognitive behavioral started to kind of expand on maybe what influences our behaviors. Maybe there are preceders to that. Maybe we are thinking something or feeling something. So CBT therapists look at the individual's conscious patterns of thought. So from this psychoanalytic like kind of foundation where there's conscious, subconscious, unconscious, they're like, let's work here. Because again, like, what do you do with this? We can at least work with this. So they view family interactions as maintained by environmental events preceding and following each member's behavior. So it still is uh, in some ways like individually based, but trying to look at individuals in a system. They attend to both the overt interactions among family members and the internal experiences of each member. So we'll get a little bit more into this into maybe if we talk about internal family systems, but ultimately it's looking at what is going on within each individual and how does that influence the patterns or the interactions that are being seen. Okay, so more fundamental premises. The basic assumption behind CBT is that behavior, cognition, and affect, emotions, are mutually influential. They mutually influence one another. One's not more powerful, but there's a reciprocal, mutually influencing behavior between all of them. Therefore, these behavioral interventions do not just change, for example, couples' interaction patterns, but are also likely to alter the ways in which partners process their interactions and affectively or emotionally experience those interventions. So we'll talk about like how this happens. So conceptual framework of CBT, like I told you, we'll talk more about this ABC process and add some letters to it. So I'm just going to define each of them. So A in this, so if you're looking at this model down here, I'll walk you through it, but this is where all of these letters fit into this model. So A is the antecedent event, which is evaluated by, so this event happens, and that, or this antecedent or activating, that's what A stands for. This event happens, then you have beliefs around the meaning of the event. So that's B. Then there's the consequent emotions or behavior that are a response to B, not A. So then what we want to do to try to resolve this, so ABC is in many ways kind of like the problem. DEF is an attempt to provide resolution or dissolve some of this. So D is where you want to disrupt the irrational beliefs. Then you want to replace with effective rational beliefs. And then the thought is that new feelings, that F, and behaviors will come of that. So if beliefs are rational, then adaptive, measured emotional and behavioral responses will follow. If they are irrational, then emotional and behavioral responses will be maladaptive. So here, again, activating event, the trigger is another very common terminology in CBT, in the CBT world. Is that this happens, then you have a belief about A, and then you have this emotional response to B, but again, not A. So A is just this thing that happens. From a CBT perspective, we are in charge of B. So we're not trying to change A. A happened. Now we're trying to change the way that we respond to A happening. So here we want to replace this irrational belief with a rational belief. And then bring in some new first we disrupt, then we bring in the effective belief, and then the final result is this new feeling. So this is the chart. Okay, so further conceptual framework here. So Ellis describes 3 classes of common irrational beliefs that lead to maladaptive consequences. So here are the 3. A perfection-based worth. So this person might say something like, I absolutely must perform outstandingly well and win the approval or love of significant others under practically all conditions at all times. If I fail, this is awful, and I am an incompetent, bad, unworthy person who will probably always fail and deserves to suffer. So some of the ways in which this may manifest is anxiety, panic, depression, despair, feelings of worthlessness. So these are some of these core beliefs that may come up, and that will make more sense later in the presentation. Second is a justice for me type of irrational belief. People must treat me nicely at all times. If they do not, they are unworthy, rotten people. They will always treat me badly and should be punished for acting so terribly. So this can manifest in anger, rage, fury, vindictiveness. And then effortless perfection. Things must be safe, hassle-free, and enjoyable all the time. If not, it is horrible, awful, and I cannot bear it. Life is impossible and hardly worth living. So here, this can manifest in self-pity, frustration, anger, discomfort, intolerance, depression, procrastination, avoidance, suicidality. So like not super fun stuff. So some 10 underlying assumptions, again, of behavioral therapy, which is in many ways like what preceded cognitive behavioral therapy. Feel free to pause it on here, and I'm not going to read all 10 of them, but pause, take notes, but here are some assumptions. Okay, so some characteristics of behavioral family therapists. So the work of behavioral family therapists, including cognitive behaviorists, has several characteristics that distinguish them from the approaches taken by a systems-oriented family therapist that we're considered. So one is a direct focus on observable behavior, such as symptoms, rather than an effort to hypothesize causality interpersonally. So a careful ongoing assessment of the specific, usually overt behavior to be altered. So notice here, if we as systemic therapists are kind of, so if this is like the surface, and I would argue like the behavior that we see is the surface. That's just like what manifests from all this other stuff. We're looking at more core causal things, or again, circular causally things, if that makes sense. So we're looking from a circular causality viewpoint, and we want to understand like some of the why, how. In many ways, behavioral therapists, they don't really care. They want to make change here because they believe that, again, that behaviors, thoughts, and affect are all mutually influential. So if we make a change here, that will inevitably make changes elsewhere. That's a theory. So there's a concern with either increasing, accelerating, or decreasing, decelerating target behavior by directly manipulating external contingencies of reinforcement. So thinking about classical conditioning, operant conditioning, those are cornerstones of CBT as well. And I'll say behavioral therapy specifically. So looking at those pieces of reinforcement, which is ultimately operant conditioning. So if you're unfamiliar, look up what operant conditioning is with reinforcement, punishment, negative punishment, negative positive reinforcement, things like that. And that will make sense. So a striving to teach and coach communication and problem-solving skills. These are key interventions. An effort to train families to monitor and modify their own reinforcement contingencies. So again, how is behavior being reinforced? I think, a really maybe classic example is a child having a tantrum. So if a child gets any reinforcement for that, whether it is being comforted, being yelled at, whatever, the child doesn't necessarily understand like consequences, punishment, things like that, or discipline. They are understanding that when I do this thing, somebody responds. So like a behavioral therapist, like very classic kind of parenting training is if a child is having a tantrum, like don't engage with that child, because no matter what way you engage with that child, it is reinforcing that behavior. So that's a part of the theory. So that's a reinforcement contingency. If you want tantrums to stop or decrease, one way of doing that is to not give attention to it so as to not reinforce it. The child's learning, like, I don't get anything from doing this. Again, that's the theory. A standard of empirically evaluating the effects of therapeutic interventions, that is really key in CBT. It's an evidence-based practice, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So a big piece of CBT is restructuring belief systems. These are called schemas, belief systems in CBT. So Ellis suggests that a philosophical restructuring of beliefs occurs as clients learn these 7 things. They are largely responsible for creating their own emotional problems. So, like I said, very rooted in accountability and responsibility. They have the ability to change these disturbances significantly. That emotional problems stem largely from irrational beliefs, to perceive clearly how their beliefs are irrational. So if they can do this, they will restructure. If they can learn to value disrupting such beliefs, they can learn to work hard to counteract dysfunctional beliefs with painful consequences, and to continue addressing dysfunctional attitudes, behaviors, and consequences throughout life. So if you can evaluate, disrupt, reassess, restructure, and do this forever, you'll be fine. All right, so CBT, findings from basic research on human cognition, research on the effectiveness of cognitive therapy for individual problems such as depression, and evidence that strictly behavioral interventions for couples' relationship problems had limited effectiveness, all contributed to a growing acceptance of cognitive interventions among behavioralists. So again, starting with like, we're just going to work on behaviors because we believe that behaviors influence cognition, influence affect. And then they were like, wait a minute, this isn't really working. Then, so emphasizing the importance of cognitive and behavior interactions among family members has been embraced by many family therapists in no small part because of its empirically supported research-based effectiveness. So you can see these are both much older citations, and they still stand today. Okay, so key concepts. Like I said, schemas, big deal here. These are enduring sets of core beliefs and attitudes about people, relationships, and so on that organize subsequent thoughts and perceptions. So another word for a schema is a belief system. Cognitive distortions are classic in CBT. These are errors in processing information. Sorry, the I is capitalized for some random reason, that lead to a misperception of reality. We'll talk about specific cognitive distortions a little later. So you have schemas, beliefs. These are individual belief systems. Then you have family schemas. This is really important when you're doing relational work to understand. So these are shared beliefs about what is occurring within the family, and of course are open to errors, distortions, and omissions impacting how family members respond emotionally and behaviorally to one another. So these are in many ways, so I'll give you an example of a possible like family schema. I think it's really easy to apply CBT in many ways when there is like what would be considered clear dysfunction in a family. So let's say that there's a family member that has an addiction. Because usually what the family does is they'll say like, that person's a problem, like we're just these innocent people. And for those of you who have yet to take chemical dependency in the family, you will learn that it's also, surprise, surprise, a systemic issue. And so anyway, with a family schema, the belief system may be that so let's say that like Tommy, make Tommy the person with the addiction. So anytime Tommy comes around, he is only wanting to ask for money, or like he always has ulterior motives for being here. So that is a family schema again, like Tommy's not a part of that. But let's say that, the other four members of the family, like that's what they have. That's the attribution of any of, um, that's what they're attributing any of Johnny's or Tommy, his presence or his engagement. So they've created this narrative. Sorry, that's not CBT language. They've created this schema that really pushes and in many ways like vilifies Tommy. So that is going to affect the interactions. So, Tommy may genuinely be trying to connect and like work on his addiction or just like is neutral. And if there is always this kind of like skeptical lean on what's happening, that's very much going to inform family dynamics. Okay, so then another concept here, automatic thoughts and beliefs. So these are stream of consciousness thoughts that run through a person's mind and seem plausible to the person, whether or not they are accurate or valid. Also, automatic thoughts, by virtue of the definition, means that they happen very quickly. So it's like the thought happens, like then there is, a resulting behavior or action or something like that, and the person is unaware of how they went from here to here. Like they got here and they're like, whoa. So a lot of what I would say therapy in general is, and specifically, I would say from a CBT lens, is slowing the person down, making these automatic thoughts more like more explicit and having a willingness to explore them. And then cognitive restructuring is ultimately changing distorted cognitions. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. More key concepts, negative reciprocity. This is an almost automatic response pattern in which a perceived negative behavior by one person results in negativity from the other. So it's just this, kind of mutually reinforcing negative pattern. Observational learning, which is how an individual learns how to perform particular responses merely by observing another person's performance to them. Like you can think about this as like modeling. Like think about that in parenting, or if you've ever done mentorship or anything like that. Like you're having these little people, or many times adults do the same thing. It was where you're just like learning how the system works by monitoring and observing the people in it. So that's another piece of this. Selective perception, which is an individual notices only some aspects of their interactions with a family member. My interactions with my spouse are always so negative, this and this and this and this. So many times the intervention with this is to make a concerted effort to look for the positive pieces. So because ultimately what selective perception is it's evidence building to your already existing belief. So if I believe, for example, that like the world is corrupt, I'm going to be really like kind of drawn toward corruption, and I might be missing where there's integrity or where there is honesty or something like that. More pure intentions, maybe. Okay, attribution. So this is a big word that's used, or term concept that's used in CBT. Ultimately, these are inferences that individuals make about causes of events they observe. And these inferences may be accurate or distorted. So again, Tommy, he only comes around because he needs money. So that's my attribution. I'm attributing his behavior to this reason. So that's going to be a barrier to me maybe being more vulnerable or more open, because if I attribute his behavior to wanting to connect and like wanting to lean into recovery or something like that, the way I interact with him is going to be very different. Then there's expectancy. So this is a prediction that an individual makes about the probability that particular events will occur in the near or distant future in particular situations. This is the same, I would say, general definition that I was using in our common factors lecture. So if for example, clients expect therapy to work, They're going to be looking for the ways in which therapy is working. If a client expects bad things to happen, they may be inadvertently acting in ways for that thing to not happen. If they expect things to work out, they will probably act in ways that are more facilitative of that. Again, that's the theory here, is expectancy also affects the way in which we behave. All right, so here are some cognitive distortions. I think I'm going over, 11 of them. This is likely not an exhaustive list. I think I might have another chart or something for you. So all or nothing thinking. This is viewing situations on one extreme or another instead of on a continuum. So an example here, if my child does bad things, it's because I'm a bad parent. Catastrophizing, predicting only negative outcomes for the future. Example here, if I fail my final, my life will be over. And they go pretty big like this. Like that is definitely a catastrophe. Disqualifying or discounting the positive, telling yourself that the good things that happen to you don't count. For example, my daughter told her friend that I was the best dad in the world, but I'm sure that she was just being nice. Emotional reasoning, letting one's feelings about something overrule facts to the contrary. So, for example, even though Steve is here at work late every day, I know I work harder than anyone else at my job. So, labeling, giving someone or something a label without finding out more about it or them. For example, my daughter would never do anything I disapproved of. Magnification or minimization. So this is emphasizing the negative or playing down the positive of a situation. For example, my professor said he made some corrections on my paper, so I know I'll probably fail the class. Here we keep going. Mental filter or tunnel vision. This is placing all one's attention on or seeing only the negatives of a situation. Example, my husband says he wishes I was better at housekeeping, so I must be a lousy wife. Mind reading. This is very common in couples. Believing that you know what others are thinking. For example, my house was dirty when my friends came over, so I know they think I'm a slob. Another example here, my daughter's boyfriend got suspended from school. He's a loser and won't ever amount to anything. Overgeneralization, making an overall negative conclusion beyond the current situation. Example, my husband didn't kiss me when he came home this evening. Maybe he doesn't love me anymore. Personalization, another one I see a lot in my clients, thinking the negative behavior of others has something to do with you. For example, my daughter has been pretty quiet lately. I wonder what I did to upset her. Personalization is also an awesome way to invalidate others' experiences or to not be a very good listener because you're so like caught up in your own stuff. We call this centering self, which is generally not a really good approach to connecting with others. Should and must, these are also could have, would have, ought to have, any of these types of statements. Having a concrete idea of how people should behave. This is very important, y'all, for you to think about this and how you use this in therapy. Like, do you think people should act a certain way? Do you think your clients should behave or should do something? Be really aware of that. So going back to our, self of the therapist work early on in this class, that I encourage you to continue to work on. These are really important for you to reflect on. So example, I should get all A's to be a good student. Okay, talking more about schemas here. So what I'm going to walk you through right now is essentially it's like getting deeper to the core from surface kind of automatic thoughts, and we're going to dig down into schemas. So schemas are the deepest of 4 levels in Beck's conceptualization of cognition. So first, at the most surface level, you have automatic thoughts. So these are knee-jerk reactions to distressing situations that run through a person's mind and that the person can generally identify, but maybe in the moment, they're not so aware of it. Such as, if my friend does not return my call in 24 hours, she really does not like me. Okay. So intermediate beliefs, okay, going a little bit deeper. So this is the automatic thought that is informed by the intermediate belief, that is informed by core beliefs, that is informed by schemas. So schemas are the deepest, but what we start to work with is the automatic thoughts, and then we dig down. So, intermediate belief, extreme or absolute rules that are more general and shape automatic thoughts, such as good friends always return calls quickly. Okay, then we're gonna keep going down here. Core beliefs, these are also global and absolute. Core beliefs are about ourselves, such as I am worthless. So Beck identifies two general unifying principle or themes that underlie most core beliefs. Autonomy, so beliefs about being effective and productive versus helpless, and sociotropic. So these are beliefs about being lovable or unlovable. So a core belief may be, I am unworthy. Therefore, my friends don't want to call me. And look, they didn't do it. So schemas. This is the deepest level of the cognitive structure. Schemas, again, belief systems, are cognitive frameworks in the mind, organizing and shaping thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. They were developed in childhood and informed by numerous other factors like family, culture, gender, religion, occupation, etc., 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 romantic relationships, historical events, things like that. Schemas lie dormant until triggered by a specific event, such as I am utterly worthless if even my best friend won't take the time to call me. No one really cares about me at all. What is the point of even trying to have friends if they only call when it's convenient for them? So once it's triggered, information tends to be filtered through cognitive distortions to support the premise of the schema, and valid evidence to the contrary is ignored. For example, even when the friend calls apologizing that she didn't call back sooner because she felt ill, this is only seen as an excuse and further confirmation of being unlovable. So it's a trap. It's a sticky trap. Okay, one way to understand and like get to some of these core schemas is what's called the vertical descent or the downward arrow technique. So this is how to identify, understand, and contradict self-defeating beliefs. So first, you identify a negative thought about a situation which is upsetting you. Then you ask the question, if this were true, what is causing me to be upset? Again, linear causality here. Then you identify a second negative thought. Then you ask again, if this were true, what is causing me to be upset? Identify a third negative thought, and so on and so on and so on. Continuing to ask, if this were true, what is causing me to be upset? So you're really wanting to get more core here. Then to process your negative thoughts, you ask questions like, what do these negative thoughts tell me about my values or the meaning of my life? What are my basic assumptions about interpersonal relationships and my self-concept? So this is just like an exercise that you would keep doing. So more about this. The downward arrow technique is a tool to help uncover the belief systems that influence I'll move me, I don't know if I'm in the way, behavior and mood. These belief systems are often unclear to us, and uncovering them can make it easier to notice them. So making implicit or covert, explicit or overt. That's always our job. Going from like what's hidden, like shining some light on it. We want to make everything explicit, even things that seem obvious. Like, let's talk about it, actually bring it into the room. So uncovering them and can make it easier to notice them and not act on them via painful patterns and destructive behavior. Although there are many types of beliefs, there are two main types, core beliefs and core fears. Here's a technique for uncovering a core belief. Write down a thought that has been bothering you. Ask yourself, what does this mean about me? Keep going until you get to the underlying core belief. So you just keep asking, what does this mean about me? What does this mean about me? What does this mean about me? So then there's a technique for uncovering a core fear. Write down a thought that has been bothering you. Ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? Keep going until something feels very core. So again, like a thought that's been bothering me, my friend didn't call me. What is the worst thing that could happen? They could not want to be friends with me anymore. Keep going until you get to I am unworthy of, or my fear is that I will never have long lasting, meaningful friendships. That I will be lonely forever. So how to challenge core beliefs and core fears. Sometimes it will be immediately clear to you that the core belief or fear is illogical. For example, you might immediately understand the chance of homelessness from unemployment is very low. So you might not be so concerned about it because you understand the conscious fear. The picture, the next one, I think, yes, contains an example, of like a maybe more obvious, clear, illogical process. Here we go. So I lost my pen. It means I have no pen. If I don't have a pen, I can't take notes. If I don't take notes, I won't be able to study. If I don't study, I will fail this class. If I fail this class, I'm not going to get a diploma. If I don't get a diploma, I won't be able to work. If I'm not able to work, I won't get money. If I don't have money, I won't be able to have any food. If I don't have any food, I will be skinny. If I become skinny, I'm ugly. If I am ugly, no one will love me. If no one loves me, I can't get married. If no one marries me, I can't have children. If I don't have children, I'm going to be alone. If I'm alone, I'll be depressed. If I'm depressed, I'll get sick. And if I'm sick, I'll die. So if you lose your pen, you will die. This is, hopefully a little bit of a funny, silly way to kind of explore how this slippery slope can kind of happen. Okay, so here are some cognitive distortions amongst couples. Again, I'm not going to take time to read this. I will say that the maybe man, I'd say maybe the three most common that I see are arbitrary inferences, selective abstractions, and mind reading. But again, go ahead and pause this here. I think these are very clear definitions and good examples of them. Okay, so I'm trying to see if, yeah, we've covered all of these, but what this I wanted to show you, and of course an example, but also a possible diagnosis that could like how this could manifest. All right, so normal family development. Normal. Remember, normal is always like this, y'all. In normal family development, the members are relatively free. Let me move me again. Of distortions in their appraisals. This is again attribution, how we assess the inference we make. That's the appraisal of the event that occurs in a relationship. So again, like my mom didn't make dinner tonight. Let's say that the pattern or what traditionally happens is historically has happened is mom making dinner. So an appraisal of this could be I would say maybe like a distorted one would be like mom is abandoning the family. Mom is checking out. I would in a like what would be considered like more adaptive or again in normal development, the appraisal of this could be like, oh, mom is busy or maybe mom needs some support. So also normal family development, they have realistic standards or ways in which they interact. Individuals realistically understand their own needs and those of their family members and can communicate them. They have flexible ways of thinking about and relating to one another in order to solve problems. So rigidity is not a part of normal family development. They have the ability to communicate clearly and collaborate in problem solving, which allows them to increase positive behaviors and decrease negative behaviors. Also increase things like connection, intimacy. Yeah. Okay. How do problems develop in families? So these are acquired negative schemas that are reactivated when a new situation arises that resembles in their thinking conditions similar to those under which the schema was learned. So I'll give you an example here of you'll learn this in your trauma and crisis intervention course, but I think that in trauma, this first one hopefully will be very clear. So I talk about this with my clients all the time who have experienced trauma and who are now, in many ways, struggling with the survival skills that they learned in an environment that doesn't necessitate the survival skills. So let's take like we'll go with couples, a partner and a couple. who is in a traumatic, abusive environment. So many times what a person who is experiencing abuse, um, they learn to be very aware of other people's body language, needs, expectations, per, specifically the perpetrator, the abuser. And so they become what's called become vigilant, very attuned to every whim of this person, and they do whatever they can to act in a way that is going to prevent any violence or try to prevent violence or harm. So if you think about what this also, like one of the costs of this is self-attunement. If I am always focused on this other person in an effort to survive this situation, very adaptive in this environment. So again, I'm kind of splitting my screen. This is abusive environment. If I am vigilant, if I am attuned to other people, this other person in particular, maybe, and I'm just even thinking about like you can put this on like a child in an abusive household. If I'm always tiptoeing and being attuned and making sure I'm doing everything that could possibly prevent any sort of violence, I am very others focused. That doesn't allow space to be introspective, attuned. So remember, attunement to self, the ability to be introspective, it's a privilege, and it comes with a foundational need in that is safety. You have to feel safe to be able to do that. Okay, they're in this environment where they have these schemas, like people are going to hurt me. I must fend for myself. I cannot ask for help. Asking for help is dangerous. Sharing my emotions, dangerous. Okay, now let's go into an environment that these behaviors and these beliefs, they don't fit. So, okay, let's say this is again, a person who's in an abusive relationship romantically, or a child who is in an abusive family. They come into a new relationship where that person their partner is not abusive. They are not coercive. They are not manipulative. They are not harmful. And this person, this is their blueprint, especially if they're a child, that the world works this way. Then I'm taking all of these beliefs and these behaviors, again, that were very adaptive to me, that allowed for me to survive that environment into here. And if this is a person that, again, is safe, that has integrity, that is trustworthy, these behaviors, they are a barrier to connection. So if my partner is asking me, how do you feel about that? And my response is, well, how do you feel? It's like, I'm asking you, I'm trying to get to know you. And essentially what I learned was I am not worth getting to know, or allowing somebody to get to know me is dangerous. That's a block to connection. So this is by no means me like blaming this person. My hope is what you're hearing from me is these schemas that are created and or acquired. Because again, you might have a child of a parent who came from an abusive household, and that parent's telling that person, don't trust anyone, or they have a abusive history or something like that. Like the world is unkind, you will be hurt, never show weakness, don't be vulnerable. Like, so these are acquired negative schemas that, again, in environments that don't necessitate survival, that you can, that are safe, these don't fit. So I hope that's making sense. So again, vigilance doesn't necessarily work here. A lack of attunement to self, or a focus on others, that's not necessary here. And it makes a lot of sense given a history. So I'll just keep going here. One of the goals in trauma work is to understand that the skills and the behaviors, the strategies that you employed here, adaptive, necessary. And when you carry them into another environment, they may be the very things that are barriers to what you want. So it is meant to hopefully increase agency, that that things can change, that you do have voice, that you can be your own agent of change here. Of course, this absolutely necessitates like a safe environment, like you do safety assessment and all that kind of stuff. So it's by no means to blame this person. It is to contextualize this person and hopefully help that person learn different skills and different ways of connecting and likely have a very different narrative about self. So again, that's narrative is obviously narrative, have a different schema about themselves, have a different way of believing about themselves, have different core beliefs, things like that. Um, and like a goal in trauma work is to create what's called disparity, that you are no longer in this environment. There is a disparity, a difference between this environment and the ways in which you had to act and behave to survive here, and the strategies that you employ for connection here. So I hope that made sense. Okay. How else do problems develop? Cognitive distortions follow these negative schemas, leading to misperception of reality. Then dysfunctional behaviors follow that. So again, the schemas inform the intermediate beliefs, the automatic beliefs, behaviors follow that. High levels of unrealistic assumptions and standards, negative attributions regarding one another's motives. So this is like, just skepticism. I see this in couples a lot where they're just like skeptical of their partner's intentions. So everything that the partner does has this kind of like veil of skepticism or negativity on it. And aversive control. The aversive control is things like threats and punishment. The way I'm going to try to control you, control the situation is through threats and punishment. A combination of negative cognitions, emotions, and behaviors in a relationship result in either a relatively chronic level of dissatisfaction or a deterioration over time. So how do we change? You want to disconfirm negative conclusions, change current distorted beliefs, and alter negative schemas leading to change in behavior and affect. So again, cognitions, behavior, affect, it's like kind of this triangle, mutually influential. The task becomes helping families restructure the family's dysfunctional beliefs, and as a consequence, helping alter their behavioral patterns. So some goals here: attempt to alter negative schemas, replace distorted cognitions with more realistic ones, change cognition in order to change dysfunctional behaviors, teach families skills that they can use long after therapy has ended. So everything that you're offering the clients should be applicable outside of the therapeutic room. And, that might take time, but they should build confidence in not needing a therapist to employ these skills. Okay, so assessment in CBT. CBT therapists include a functional analysis, and I'll go through this in more detail, of inner experiences. So these are thoughts, attitudes, expectations, and beliefs, as well as behaviors. They see individuals as interactive participants, interrupting, judging, and influencing each other's behaviors. Typically, they gather such data using three main forms of clinical assessment: self-report questionnaires, individual and joint interviews, and direct behavioral observations of family interaction. So they're just kind of sit back and see what happens, how the family talks to each other and all that stuff. So interview-based data may reveal automatic thoughts and beliefs. So examples here: he avoids talking to me at night. Some expectancies: I hate to make plans with friends because he's always late. Or attributions: the reason he acts as he does is because he doesn't care about my feelings. So you can see how much of a barrier to connection that is. Okay, so I'm going to offer some like pictures of what these may look like. I'll give you some later in the presentation as well. So here is a thought log that you can use in session. So you just like take this top row and the bottom row essentially, and then you fill out this middle row. So what is the situation? What were your automatic thoughts about it? What emotions or mood, like, did this elicit? What is the evidence that you have to support the thought? What evidence do you have that doesn't support the thought? What is an alternative thought that you can have? And then rate the mood now. So you start with a situation, you offer an alternative thought, see how to rate the mood. But so here are the questions that you would ask: what actually happened, where, what, how, and when? What thoughts went through your mind? How much did you believe them on a scale of 0 to 100? What emotions did you feel at the time? Rate how intense they were from 0 to 100. One being not intense at all, 100 being the most intense. What has happened to make you believe the thought is true? What has happened to prove the thought not true? What is another way to think about the situation? And then um how is your mood? So here you can see like worthless and hopeless were on the emotions in column. Sorry, I'm pointing to it like you can see me pointing in column 3. So they extrapolated hopelessness and worthlessness so that I don't know. Oh, okay. So each of these automatic thoughts had a complementing or correlating, I should say, correlating emotion. So here they extrapolated hopeless. So hopeless went from essentially a 90 to a 10 with a thought altering, then worthless. I don't know what the rate was before. So again, 0 as like not intense at all, and 10 being very intense. Okay. So I also offered you, because you remember you can go to the Google Drive and you can access these PowerPoints, and these hyperlinks are live. So I wanted to just show you, yes, this behavior chain. So the first one, there's 2 links here. They link to these worksheets. So a chain analysis of the problem. This is the first one. You can see it's a, multi-page resource for you that you can easily download. And then this is another behavior chain or behavioral analysis chain that you could use with a client, or practice with each other or something. Multiple pages here. So I just wanted to offer you some resources. Okay. So here's just another one for you. So a CBT behavior chain worksheet. So first name your behavioral issue and then mention the behavioral issue precisely with an I statement. So this on this line, of course I zoomed it in a weird way, so everything looks weird. But what are the general environmental triggers that you think? So again, trigger is also this activating event that might precipitate your problem. So this is the A piece. What are your reactions? Here's the B piece. So here's what I think about it. Here are the feelings that come up. Here's what I do. Enlists the possible costs and benefits. So it's like a cost benefit analysis here. What are the costs to engaging in my reaction? What's the benefit of my reaction? What are others' reactions? So trying to pull from out of self a little bit more, see how you affect others and how is it stopped. So that's just another example here of a behavior chain. Okay, so talking more about some therapeutic interventions. So cognitive restructuring, this would help the client modify perceptions and allow them to produce new self-statements. So it's upsetting that we don't agree, but that doesn't mean I'm a failure as a person or that our marriage is doomed. So that's a cognitive restructure. Reducing selective perceptions, modifying biased attributions, modifying inaccurate expectancies, and challenging unrealistic or extreme assumptions and standards. These are some of the purposes of cognitive restructuring. So emotional regulation, we'll talk more about this if y'all want to learn about dialectical behavioral therapy, which is also an offspring in many ways of CBT. So emotional regulation involves an individual's ability to control the strength of their emotions. So one thing you can do here is utilize relaxation techniques. Another option here is a CBT specific intervention called systematic desensitization. So this begins with a low intensity image and increasingly works toward direct contact with a stressful stimulus. Like this is used with phobias. So like arachnophobia, agoraphobia, where you start like arachnophobia, for example, like you start with thinking of an image of a spider, then maybe you see an actual image of a spider, then maybe you will go to a zoo that has spiders, but maybe not go in the actual exhibit. Then maybe you'll go in the exhibit. Then maybe you will be in the same room without a wall between you and a spider, but like very far in the wall in the room. Then maybe you'll just like go closer and closer and closer in the room until you are maybe holding a spider. maybe you'll hold the spider far away from yourself, then maybe you'll like put it to your face or something. So hopefully I outlined what systematic desensitization an example is. Okay, some techniques. So I'm talking about functional analysis here. I'll give you an example, I think, in the next slide of what an actual functional analysis is or what it would look like. So this involves observing sequences of behaviors in family interaction and identifying both what behaviors of other family members precede, which tend to elicit another's problematic behavior. So there is some circular analysis here. I would argue in some ways it's still just like groupings of linear causality, and what behaviors of other family members follow it. So what tend to reinforce it or punishment, also a conversation about what happens internally for each member. So you're understanding like a functional analysis in some ways is like, what is the function of like this event, or what is the function of the behaviors that in response to this event. So another technique is changing frequencies of positive and negative behavior. Like what I talked about earlier is like looking for positives here. You can employ behavioral contracts. You could do this in behavioral couples therapy. You can do quid pro quo agreements. You do this, I'll do this. Good faith agreements, parenting training, behavior charts, but ultimately, like instead of yelling at your kids every time, or 10 times a day, that you try to decrease that to 5 times a day and also employ positive interactions with them 5 times a day or something. That's arbitrary, but I'm just giving an example. Communication skill training, you'll learn about this in couples work, but ultimately you're, teaching them about I statements, intentional dialogue, things like that. Problem solving training. This is called conflict resolution also. Cost benefit analysis. I showed you a little bit of that earlier. This involves making a written list of the costs and benefits, or the pros and cons, and rationally thinking through the list from both perspectives. There's stress inoculation. This is when individuals rehearse self-statements that calm them and that direct their behavior. These could be things like mantras, affirmations. Okay, so here's an example of functional analysis, with the example being substance use. So functional analysis plays a critical role in helping the client and therapist assess high-risk situations that are likely to lead to substance use, and providing insights into what may trigger or stimulate the client's substance use. For example, these could be interpersonal difficulties, opportunities to take risks, or feel euphoria not otherwise available in the client's life. Later in treatment, functional analysis of substance use episodes help identify those situations or states in which the individual still has difficulty coping. Initially, the therapist conducts a functional analysis of a recent episode of substance use with the client. So, an example here, the therapist will ask a series of questions aimed at eliciting insights into the client's thinking and recollections to get an idea of how all this works. Here we go. So, tell me all you can about the last time you used. Where were you, and what were you doing? What happened before? How are you feeling? When was the first time you were aware of wanting to use? Or like, tell me about your first awareness, when you were first aware that you wanted to use. What was the high like at the beginning? What was it like later? How can you think of anything positive, or can you think of anything positive that happened as a result of using? I would ask it as like, what were any positives? Because this seems a little too close-ended for me, and it feels too too guided, like pushing the client to like, can't you see the negatives of this? Like, I want them to come to that themselves. And then what were any negative consequences of using? So you're wanting to understand the process. Okay, more techniques. Modeling. So this is literally just like showing the clients how you would want them to interact, or what you think would be helpful for them to do. Having a reinforcement schedule. This is a schedule of reinforcement that refers to the specific relationship between the number, timing, or frequency of responding and the delivery of the reward. Parents do this with like chore charts with kids all the time. In other words, once a behavior has been shaped, it can be maintained by various patterns of reinforcement. I will say that one of the one of the risks is that there can become a dependence on the reinforcement, and then the behavior can stop once the reinforcement is taken away. So, if anyone has ever heard of like contingency management in regard to like addiction, so basically what happens is people like there are studies that test like what happens if we pay people to stop using or to not use. It's like the success rates of these are crazy high. I mean, um, and then the reinforcement is taken away, and whoa, people haven't really like learned any new skills or anything like that. They just got paid to not use. So now that that payment has stopped, like the use began. So to me, like contingency management, for example, is this like artificially um artificially positive or successful or effective treatment when it if they did any sort of longitudinal studies, they would see like, yes, abstinence is very high while payment happens. And then once it stops, like attrition or is very high. Anyway, contracts are another technique you could use. So quid pro quo contracts, contracts in which one person agrees to make a change after the other has made a requested change. Good faith contracts involve two people mutually agreeing to make changes that the other wants without the contingency that the other changes first. I mean, I think that good faith contracts they sound preferable to me, but maybe a quid pro quo is where like a couple needs to start or something. Disrupting or disputing irrational beliefs. Therapists actively work with clients to challenge their irrational beliefs about the problem situation that may be, wow, there's so many typos in this sentence, may be causing or exacerbating the situation. Okay, what's your role? It is one of teacher consultant, in which you provide didactic information, so some psychoeducation, instructions, modeling of constructive responses, and coaching as family members try new skills and responses with one another. Beck advocated that therapists and clients work together to teach the client new methods they can use in the future for evaluating other beliefs, all leading to changing dysfunctional behaviors. Okay, so I told you at the beginning that one of the things I wanted to do with you was share some relational theories that are rooted in CBT. So Gottman's approach is rooted in CBT. So here, Gottman identifies 8 relationship dysfunctions that predict divorce or miserable, unhappy, dissatisfied relationship. More negative than positive, more negativity than positivity. So relationships headed for divorce have a ratio of positive to negative emotions of 0.8 to 1 or less, while enduring couples have a ratio of 5 to 1. So 0.8 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. Happy couples have a 5 to 1 ratio, 5 positive to every 1 negative. So one thing that you do with couples is like when they do have a fight or a negative interaction, that they are very purposefully and thoughtfully engaging in 5 positive interactions to essentially like counterbalance that one. So escalation of negative affect, these come in the forms of criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. These are also called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's a 5th one. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, these are called the 4 horsemen. Turning away. So these couples, they will turn away from one another. So in like any attempts or like bids for connection are ignored. So you can think about this as like literally turning away from one another or metaphorically turning away from one another. They have a failure of repair attempts. They're unable to heal wounds from normal relationship conflict. They have negative sentiment override. So their underlying assumption of their partners and how they act is negative. So like I said, they have these negative attributions, this just like overall negative kind of skeptical view of their partner. They maintain vigilance and physiological arousal. So they're constantly in a state of, cortisol production, essentially. They're in a more perpetual or chronic state of agitation, which perpetuates negative thoughts, hinders processing, and eliminates humor. They have chronic chronic diffuse physiological arousal. So there's a generalized response to perceived threat that engenders defensiveness and lessens the ability to resolve differences constructively. And then finally, they have the failure. So one of the like tenets of Gottman is that you have a ability to be, you are willing to be influenced by your partner. And they've done a lot of their research with heterosexual couples. So this one is specific to that. The failure of men to accept influence from their women, from their partner. But just anyway. So there's a rejection of influence through disengagement or very intense responses. Okay, so this is the Sound Relationship House. I don't think there's any links here, but let me just like walk you through how to read this. So this is all built with trust and commitment. Like think of these as like the walls that support all of these. You start from the bottom and work your way up. So the first is that you have this foundation of love. Again, that is like supported by trust and commitment, but this foundation of understanding one another. So you know each other's worlds, and that of course builds trust, commitment, safety, all of that. So on with that foundation, then you share fondness and admiration. Like you have this um general enjoyment of being with your partner. You admire them, you support them, you respect them, you look up to them, you aspire to be better because of them. Things like that, you like mutually benefit one another in that way. You turn toward each other instead of away. So when you have a conflict, you make an attempt to come together to understand each other's perspective, and you work to have resolution, or at least again understanding, to walking away from that. You have a positive perspective. So one of the things that I say to my clients is giving your partner the most generous interpretation of their behavior. So, my partner didn't unload the dishwasher. Instead of being like, they don't respect me, they think it's my job, they don't care about our house, that you say something like, oh, they must have been busy, they must have forgotten, they'll get to it later. Like that's a more generous interpretation. So then again, these are building on one another. So you're working on managing conflict. So you accept your partner's influence. You have dialogue about problems. You practice self-soothing. So you have an ability to self-regulate, which allows the two of you to be able to co-regulate. Then you're looking at the future. You have dreams that you share, and you do what you can to help them come true. So if your partner, for example, wants to like open a private practice, that you are doing what you can to help facilitate that dream, just as they would with whatever dreams that you may have. And then finally, you're creating shared meaning. So this is where we use we language. Who are we as a couple? Like, yes, you have your individual identities, but you're coming together for shared meaning of potentially like adversity, loss, grief, again, an identity as a couple. So that's a really brief understanding of the Sound Relationship House. So in the next couple of minutes, we'll wrap up here soon. More empirical research on the effectiveness of behavioral and cognitive behavioral couple and family treatments than any other approach, except for EFT, emotionally focused therapy. They also have like labs, and these are in many ways like manualized approaches that are they are easier to test given the requirements or the guidelines of effective treatments or evidence-based treatments, more so than approaches like narrative. But anyway, they are empirically based. Cognitive behavioral couples therapy is more effective in improving self-reported relationship satisfaction than a no treatment wait list. So it's like CBCT is better than nothing. They also it's better than purely behavioral interventions, just communication training, and just problem solving training. So it's better than nothing. It's better than only doing behavioral stuff, only doing communication training, or only doing problem solving training. Then Bauckham and colleagues conducted 2 studies that demonstrated cognitive restructuring can contribute to effectiveness in couples therapy. So again, like pretty old citations here. Um, yeah, just to be aware of the research that's being cited. Okay, a theoretical critique of CBT. So, cognitive behavioral therapy interventions have been applied to diverse populations, including Latino, African American, and Asian clients. So, if you want a review of all of them, LGBTQI plus clients and clients with intellectual disabilities, cognitive behavioral models of couple and family therapy have been challenged by some adherents of systems theory as being limited to linear rather than circular concept of causality and family relationships. So just keeping that in mind. So summary here. Okay, I've got, I think, 2 more slides for you. Cognitive behavioral therapists attempt to increase positive interaction between family members, emphasizing the importance of self-regulation and self-direction in altering behavior. Proper assessment plays a key role, which requires identifying the problem, measuring progress, and validating change. Cognitive interventions view stress in a troubled relationship as influenced by the interaction, again, mutual interaction of cognitive, behavioral, and affective factors. So, cognitive restructuring is directed at changing dysfunctional interactive patterns and distorted belief systems or schemas as couples acquire skills in problem solving. CBT, or cognitive behavioral family therapy, is directed at restructuring distorted beliefs, again, schemas learned early in life from the family of origin, cultural traditions, mass media, and relationship experiences. In turn, these schemas affect automatic thoughts and emotional responses to others. Okay, so if you want to see CBT in like a more of a relational form. These are two, again, these are, live links to psychotherapy.net that, again, if you navigate to the drive, you'll be able to click on these, but essentially they go to, again, videos in psychotherapy.net. One is CBT for a difficult relationship. The other one is Imago, intentional dialogue. Imago relationship therapy is eclectic or integrative, growing out of psychoanalytic theory, depth psychology, and behavioral sciences, as well as elements of systems therapy, gestalt, transactional analysis, and cognitive therapy. I think that's the last slide. So let me exit out of this. So again, if you click on these links, they'll go to, this is Imago's couple therapy. And then this is the cognitive behavioral therapy with a difficult couple with John Krumboltz. And that is my lecture for today, y'all.